They were American royalty. The name Kennedy represented power, glamour, and limitless potential. But behind the camera flashes and political victories lurked something darker. Plane crashes, unexplained deaths, secrets that would destroy lives. One senator would even wonder out loud whether some terrible force was hunting his family. What started as the American dream became a nightmare that spanned generations. The hidden daughter. Before the assassinations, before the scandals that dominated headlines, the Kennedy family made a decision that would haunt them for decades. In November 1941, Rosemary Kennedy walked into a hospital for what her father promised would help her. She was 23 years old, vibrant, and attractive. When she emerged, she could barely walk or speak. Rosemary was the eldest daughter of Joseph and Rose Kennedy, born in 1918 during an influenza outbreak. The birth itself was traumatic. The doctor was delayed, and a nurse instructed Rose to keep her legs closed, trapping the baby in the birth canal for 2 hours. Whether this caused Rosemary's developmental challenges remains unknown, but from early childhood, she struggled to keep pace with her siblings. Her brothers and sisters would go on to shape American politics and history. John would become president. Robert would serve as Attorney General. Ted would become one of the Senate's most powerful figures. Rosemary, meanwhile, struggled with reading and writing. She repeated grades. She needed help with tasks her younger siblings mastered easily. For years, the family worked to include her. They hired specialists. They sent her to private boarding schools. During the 1930s, when Joseph Kennedy served as ambassador to Britain, Rosemary accompanied the family to London and thrived at a convent school there. She attended social events, wore beautiful gowns, and, by all accounts, seemed happy. But back in the United States, things changed. Rosemary was now in her early 20s, a beautiful young woman who was beginning to attract male attention. She started sneaking out of her boarding school at night, going to bars, meeting strangers. Her mood swings intensified. She had seizures and violent outbursts that alarmed her caretakers. Joseph Kennedy was grooming his sons for political careers. He needed everything to be perfect. The family image couldn't be tarnished by a daughter who might get pregnant or develop what people whispered about as mental illness. When doctors Walter Freeman and James Watts approached him about a new procedure called a lobotomy, Joseph didn't hesitate. He didn't consult his wife. He didn't ask Rosemary. He simply scheduled the surgery. The procedure took place in November 1941. Rosemary was mildly sedated but awake. The doctors drilled 2 holes into her skull near the front. They inserted metal spatulas. As they worked, they asked Rosemary to recite prayers, sing songs, count backward. When her responses became incoherent, they stopped cutting. The surgery was catastrophic. Rosemary lost the ability to walk without assistance. Her speech was reduced to garbled sounds. Her personality vanished. The vibrant young woman who had danced at embassy parties was gone, replaced by someone with the mental capacity of a young child. She was incontinent and would need full-time care for the rest of her life. Joseph institutionalized her immediately at St. Coletta in Wisconsin. Rose didn't visit for 20 years. Joseph never visited at all. Rosemary's siblings had no idea where she was. When people asked about her absence, the family claimed she was reclusive, living quietly away from the spotlight. The truth remained hidden for decades. During John F. Kennedy's 1960 presidential campaign, the family simply said Rosemary was mentally challenged and preferred privacy. It wasn't until 1987 that historian Doris Kearns Goodwin revealed the lobotomy in her book about the Kennedy family. By then, Joseph had been dead for nearly 20 years, unable to answer for what he'd done. Rosemary lived until 2005, spending over 60 years institutionalized. Her sisters Eunice, Patricia, and Jean, along with brother Ted, were with her when she died at age 86. But those 6 decades of life came after the real Rosemary had already been destroyed on an operating table, sacrificed to protect the family's political ambitions. Yet this was only the beginning of the tragedies that would befall the Kennedys. War claims the golden son. Joseph Kennedy Sr. had 9 children, but his favourite was clear. Joseph Jr., the eldest son, carried all his father's hopes. Handsome, charismatic, and politically ambitious, Joe Jr. was being groomed to become the first Catholic president of the United States. During World War II, Joe Jr. volunteered for a secret and exceptionally dangerous mission. On August 12, 1944, he climbed into a bomber aircraft loaded with 21,000 pounds of explosives. The plan was to fly the aircraft toward Nazi submarine pens in France, arm the explosives, then parachute out before the plane crashed into its target. But Joe Jr. never got the chance to escape. 2 massive explosions rocked the aircraft while still over England. The plane disintegrated in mid-air, killing both pilots instantly. Joe Jr. was 29 years old. No one ever determined what caused the explosions. The mystery remains unsolved. The loss devastated Joseph Sr. His golden son, his chosen heir to political power, was gone. The family's grief was profound. But political ambition doesn't die with one son when you have others. Joseph redirected his focus to his second son, John, who had never been intended for politics due to his chronic health problems. John had always lived in his older brother's shadow. Now, suddenly, the weight of family expectations shifted entirely to him. He would have to become what Joe Jr. was meant to be. The pressure was immense, but John rose to meet it, though he carried chronic pain and health issues that would plague him throughout his shortened life. And the tragedies weren't finished with the next generation. Ted Kennedy's brush with death. June 19, 1964, started as a routine campaign trip. Senator Ted Kennedy was flying from Washington to Massachusetts for the state Democratic Convention. He was aboard a twin-engine Aero Commander with the pilot, his legislative aide Edward Moss, and fellow Senator Birch Bayh, along with Bayh's wife. As the plane approached the airport in Southampton, Massachusetts, visibility was poor. Low clouds and fog made navigation difficult. The pilot descended too early. The aircraft clipped treetops in an apple orchard and crashed violently into the ground. The pilot and Ted's aide, Edward Moss, were killed instantly. Senator Bayh pulled Ted from the wreckage before it could catch fire. Ted had suffered a broken back, punctured lung, broken ribs, and internal bleeding. He spent 5 months in a hospital, much of it flat on his back in traction. During his recovery, Ted had plenty of time to think. He'd now lost his oldest brother, Joe Jr. in a plane crash during the war, his sister Kik in another crash in 1948, and his brother John to an assassin's bullet just 7 months earlier. Robert Kennedy visited him in the hospital and made a comment to an aide that would prove chillingly prescient. "Somebody up there doesn't like us." Ted used those 5 months to contemplate what kind of senator he wanted to be. He read extensively, consulted with advisors, and emerged from the hospital with a new sense of purpose. But he also emerged knowing that death had stalked his family with unusual persistence. He wasn't wrong. Kathleen's deadly choice. Just 4 years after losing Joe Jr., another plane crash claimed another Kennedy. Kathleen Kennedy, nicknamed Kik, was vibrant and beloved by everyone who knew her. During the family's time in England, she fell in love with William Cavendish, the Marquis of Hartington, giving her the title Lady Hartington when they married. But their happiness was brief. William was killed in action in 1944, just 4 months after their wedding. Kik was devastated, but eventually began rebuilding her life. In 1948, she started a romance with Peter Fitzwilliam, a British earl. Her family disapproved because Fitzwilliam was married and seeking a divorce. On May 13, 1948, Kick and Fitzwilliam boarded a small plane in France, flying through a severe storm. The plane crashed in the Rhone Valley, killing all 4 people aboard. Kick was 28 years old. Her mother Rose, still angry about the relationship, refused to attend the funeral in England. The family had now lost 2 children to plane crashes, both in their 20s, both involving circumstances that remained somewhat mysterious. The pattern was emerging, though no one yet spoke of a curse. The assassination that shook America. November 22, 1963, changed everything. President John F. Kennedy was riding in a motorcade through Dallas, Texas, when shots rang out. The president slumped forward, mortally wounded. The assassination was captured on film by Abraham Zapruder. The images seared into American consciousness forever. JFK had been in Texas to shore up political support ahead of the 1964 election. The day started with a breakfast speech in Fort Worth, then a flight to Dallas. The weather cleared, so the bubble top was removed from the presidential limousine. Jackie Kennedy sat beside her husband, wearing a pink suit that would soon be stained with his blood. The motorcade travelled through Dealey Plaza at 12:30 p.m. Shots fired from the Texas School Book Depository struck the president. Governor John Connally, riding in the same car, was also hit. Jackie Kennedy cradled her dying husband as the limousine raced to Parkland Hospital. Despite desperate efforts by doctors, President Kennedy was pronounced dead at 1 p.m. He was 46 years old. Within hours, police arrested Lee Harvey Oswald, a former Marine who worked at the book depository. But the investigation would be forever complicated by what happened next. On November 24th, as Oswald was being transferred from city jail to county jail, nightclub owner Jack Ruby pushed through the crowd and shot Oswald at point-blank range. The murder was broadcast live on television, witnessed by millions of Americans. JFK's murder unleashed conspiracy theories that persist today. Was it Lee Harvey Oswald acting alone? Was there a second shooter on the grassy knoll? Were elements of organised crime involved? Was it connected to Robert Kennedy's aggressive pursuit of mob figures? Were intelligence agencies somehow complicit? The questions multiplied endlessly, fueled by inconsistencies in the official investigation and the convenient death of the accused assassin. The nation mourned. At the funeral, JFK's young son, John Jr., saluted his father's casket on his 3rd birthday. The image became iconic. Caroline Kennedy stood beside her mother, both veiled in black. The world watched as Jackie Kennedy displayed remarkable composure, maintaining dignity while her private grief played out on the world stage. For the Kennedy family, this was personal tragedy wrapped in public spectacle. They had to grieve while the world watched, while conspiracy theories swirled, while political rivals and allies alike offered condolences that felt hollow in the face of such devastating loss. The presidency had made them the most powerful family in America. It had also made them targets. Robert Kennedy, who had served as his brother's Attorney General, was devastated. He'd been intensely loyal to his brother, pursuing organised crime figures, navigating the Cuban Missile Crisis, supporting civil rights efforts. Now he had to pick up the pieces while wondering if his own work had somehow contributed to his brother's death. But the worst was yet to come for Robert Kennedy. Lightning strikes twice. By 1968, Robert F. Kennedy had emerged from his brother's shadow. After serving as Attorney General under JFK and then under President Lyndon Johnson, he won a Senate seat representing New York in 1964. But the Senate wasn't enough. America was divided over the Vietnam War, cities were burning with racial unrest, and Robert believed he could heal the nation's wounds. He announced his candidacy for president in March 1968, running on an anti-war platform and promising to address poverty and inequality. His campaign attracted young people, minorities, and working-class voters who saw him as the heir to his brother's vision. The campaign was electric, with massive crowds gathering wherever Robert appeared. On June 5, 1968, Robert won the California Democratic primary, a crucial victory that put him on a path toward the nomination. After his victory speech at the Ambassador Hotel in Los Angeles, he exited through the hotel kitchen, taking a shortcut to meet with reporters. That's where Sirhan, a 24-year-old Palestinian angered by Kennedy's support for Israel during the Six-Day War, was waiting with a .22 caliber revolver. Sirhan opened fire in the cramped kitchen hallway. Robert was shot 3 times, including once in the head. 5 other people were wounded in the chaos. Security personnel and bystanders wrestled Sirhan to the ground. Football player Rosie Greer and journalist George Plimpton helped subdue the shooter. Robert was rushed to the hospital, where doctors performed surgery, but the damage was too severe. He died early the next morning, June 6th, at age 42. His assassination came exactly 5 years after his brother's murder. 2 Kennedy brothers, both seeking the presidency, both shot dead in public while the nation watched in horror. The impact on the family was devastating. Ted Kennedy was left to carry the family's political legacy. He wondered out loud whether his family was being hunted, whether some terrible force was targeting them. After Robert's funeral, Ted retreated from public life briefly, shell-shocked by the latest tragedy. By this point, he'd lost 3 siblings to plane crashes and 2 brothers to assassins. At 36 years old, he was the last surviving son, bearing the weight of impossible expectations. Within a year, Ted would face his own life-altering tragedy, one largely of his own making: Chappaquiddick, the scandal that destroyed a political future. July 18th, 1969, was a warm summer night on Chappaquiddick Island, Massachusetts. Ted Kennedy attended a party with campaign workers and volunteers who had worked for his late brother Robert. Among them was Mary Jo Kopechne, a 28-year-old strategist known for her dedication and intelligence. Late that evening, around 11:15 p.m., Ted left the party with Mary Jo, offering her a ride to the ferry that would take her back to her hotel. But instead of heading toward the ferry, Ted's 1967 Oldsmobile Delmont 88 turned onto Dyke Road, an unpaved path that led to a bridge. The wooden bridge had no guardrails. The car went off the bridge and plunged into Poacher Pond. The vehicle landed upside down in about 8 feet of water. Ted later claimed he dove repeatedly trying to save Mary Jo, but couldn't reach her in the dark, cold water. He said he swam to shore, then walked back to his hotel in a daze, passing several houses with lights on without stopping to call for help. What happened next destroyed any chance Ted had at the presidency. Instead of immediately calling police or knocking on doors seeking help, Ted consulted with friends and his lawyer. He didn't report the accident for 10 hours. By the time police were called the next morning, Mary Jo had been dead all night, trapped in the submerged car. Police Chief Dominic Arena arrived at the scene around 8:20 a.m. after getting a call about a submerged vehicle. Divers recovered Mary Jo's body. She was found in the back seat, in a position that suggested she'd been trying to get air. Some investigators later theorized she might have survived for hours in an air pocket, breathing the last oxygen trapped in the car while waiting for rescue that never came. The police chief who investigated would later say he never understood why Ted waited so long to report what happened. Arena charged Ted with leaving the scene of an accident causing personal injury. Some questioned whether Ted was actually the one driving. Others wondered what he and Mary Jo were doing on that isolated road. Ted's statement raised more questions than it answered. He claimed he was unfamiliar with the area and took a wrong turn. He said he was in shock after escaping the car. He insisted he dove repeatedly trying to rescue Mary Jo, but the 10-hour delay, the failure to call police from any of the nearby houses, and the circumstances of why they were on that road all generated intense scrutiny and suspicion. At the inquest, Ted's testimony contained inconsistencies. The investigation was complicated by the fact that Ted was a powerful senator with connections and resources. An autopsy wasn't performed on Mary Jo's body until after she'd been embalmed, limiting what could be determined. Her family chose not to pursue the matter aggressively, accepting a settlement from Ted's insurance. Ted eventually pleaded guilty to leaving the scene of an accident. He received a 2-month suspended sentence, no jail time. His political career survived, but barely. His presidential ambitions were finished. In a televised statement a week after the incident, Ted Kennedy spoke about the tragedy and wondered aloud whether some curse actually hung over all the Kennedys. The statement was remarkable for several reasons. Ted took responsibility for his actions while simultaneously suggesting he was a victim of family tragedy. He appealed to Massachusetts voters for their support while dodging the hardest questions about that night. It was classic Kennedy, powerful yet evasive, appealing yet incomplete. By this point, Ted had lost 4 siblings prematurely: Joe Jr., Kick, Jack, and Bobby. He was the last brother standing, carrying the burden of the family name and all its tragedies. But now he'd added to those tragedies, his actions directly resulting in a young woman's death. The guilt would haunt him for the rest of his life. Mary Jo Kopechne's parents attended her funeral with quiet dignity. They never publicly blamed Ted Kennedy, though Mary Jo's mother once said she wondered what her daughter's life would have been like if she'd lived. Mary Jo was buried in Pennsylvania, far from the waters that claimed her life and the political dynasty that had drawn her into its orbit: addiction, trauma, and the next generation. The trauma wasn't confined to the famous siblings. It cascaded through the next generation with devastating force, claiming lives in ways that seemed almost predictable given the family's history. David Kennedy, the 4th of Robert F. Kennedy's 11 children, was 12 years old when his father was shot. The trauma of that loss would define the rest of his short life. The day after the assassination, David watched the footage of his father's murder playing on television. Images of his father bleeding on the kitchen floor of the Ambassador Hotel, replaying over and over. The trauma shattered him in ways no one fully understood at the time. David turned to substances to cope. First, it was recreational, experimenting like many teenagers in the 1970s. But for David, it became something darker. The substances weren't just escape, they were the only way he could manage the pain of what he'd witnessed and lost. A car accident in 1973 left him with chronic pain, and doctors prescribed him painkillers. The combination of trauma, addiction, and prescription medication created a deadly spiral. His family tried to help. David went to rehabilitation facilities multiple times. He experienced overdoses that didn't kill him, each time returning to the substances that were destroying him. His siblings watched helplessly as David deteriorated, unable to save him from demons they didn't fully understand. On April 25, 1984, David checked into room 107 at the Brazilian Court Hotel in Palm Beach, Florida. He was there to visit family, but had relapsed again. A hotel employee found him dead the next morning. He was 28 years old. The cause was an overdose of cocaine combined with prescription painkillers, Demerol and Mellaril. David's death highlighted something the family had tried to keep private for generations. Mental health struggles and addiction ran through multiple generations of Kennedys. The pressure of being a Kennedy, combined with witnessing and experiencing trauma, had consequences the family was only beginning to acknowledge publicly. Patrick Kennedy, Ted's son, would later write extensively about his own battles with addiction and mental health issues, arguing that many of the family's tragedies could have been prevented with better understanding and treatment of these conditions. He pointed specifically to Rosemary's lobotomy and David's death as examples of how the family's culture of secrecy around mental health issues had deadly consequences. The sky slope and the ocean. The tragedies continued into the 1990s. Michael Kennedy, Robert's sixth child, was skiing in Aspen, Colorado on New Year's Eve 1997. He was playing a Kennedy family tradition, ski football, where participants toss a football while skiing downhill. Michael was skiing without a helmet when he hit a tree. The impact killed him instantly. He was 39 years old, leaving behind a wife and 3 children. His death came amid scandal. Just months earlier, news had broken about an inappropriate relationship with a teenage babysitter. But the death that truly captured the nation's attention came less than 2 years later. JFK Jr. The crash that ended the dream. John F. Kennedy Jr. represented something special to Americans. The little boy who saluted his father's casket had grown into a handsome, charismatic man. He'd gone to Brown University, earned a law degree, passed the bar exam on his 3rd try, and founded a political magazine called George. In 1996, he married Carolyn Bessette, a former Calvin Klein publicist. They seemed to have everything. But behind the glamorous facade, the marriage was troubled. Carolyn struggled with the constant media attention. John wanted children. Carolyn wasn't ready. Reports suggested they were living separately by mid-1999. John had also discovered a passion for flying. For him, being in the air provided escape from the relentless attention that followed him everywhere. It was freedom. In April 1998, he got his pilot's license. In April 1999, he bought a Piper Saratoga. On the evening of July 16, 1999, John prepared to fly to Hyannisport for his cousin Rory's wedding. He would first stop at Martha's Vineyard to drop off Carolyn's sister, Lauren Bessette, who was visiting friends there. John's regular flight instructor wasn't available that night. John chose to fly without him. The day before the flight, John had visited his doctor to have a cast removed from his ankle, which he'd broken in a paragliding accident. Though the cast was off, his ankle was still tender, and he needed crutches. He also faced multiple stressors. His magazine was losing millions, his marriage was strained, and his closest friend, Anthony Radziwill, was dying of cancer. The plane took off from New Jersey at 8:38 p.m. It should have been a routine flight along the coastline, but conditions weren't ideal. A thick haze reduced visibility. John was certified only for visual flight rules. He needed to see landmarks to navigate. He didn't have an instrument rating that would allow him to fly safely in poor visibility. Around 9:40 p.m., the plane disappeared from radar about 17 miles from Martha's Vineyard. John never made a distress call. When he didn't arrive at Hyannisport, family members reported him missing. The next morning, a massive search began. A beachcomber found Lauren Bessette's business card washed up on a Martha's Vineyard beach, an ominous sign. On July 21st, 5 days after the crash, Navy divers found the plane's wreckage in about 120 feet of water. All 3 bodies were still strapped in their seats. John was 38, Carolyn was 33, and Lauren was 34. The National Transportation Safety Board investigation concluded that John had experienced spatial disorientation. Flying over water at night in haze, with no visual references, he lost his sense of which way was up. The plane went into a descent that turned into a death spiral. All 3 died on impact. The media coverage was enormous, but something was noteworthy in its absence. While headlines focused on JFK Jr., many barely mentioned Carolyn. Lauren Bessette, who had simply been travelling to see friends for the weekend, was often overlooked entirely. The Kennedy name overshadowed everything else, even in death. Ted Kennedy arranged for a private burial at sea. On July 22nd, the ashes of all 3 were scattered in the Atlantic from a Navy ship, returning them to the waters that had claimed their lives. The loss of JFK Jr. felt like the end of something. He was the last best hope for a Kennedy return to the White House. The son of Camelot was gone, and with him went the dream of restoring the family's political dynasty. The curse continues. Even in recent years, the tragedies haven't stopped. In 2011, Cara Kennedy, Ted's daughter, died of a heart attack while exercising at age 51. She'd successfully battled lung cancer years earlier and seemed healthy. Her sudden death shocked those who knew her. In 2012, Mary Richardson Kennedy, the wife of Robert F. Kennedy Jr., took her own life at age 52. She had struggled with depression and substance issues. The circumstances surrounding her death were painful and complex. In 2019, Sayasa Kennedy Hill, Robert F. Kennedy's granddaughter, was found deceased at the Kennedy compound in Hyannisport. She was 22 years old. The cause was determined to be an accidental overdose, likely connected to depression she had spoken about publicly. Then, in 2020, another tragedy struck. Maeve Kennedy McKean, another of Robert's grandchildren, went out in a canoe on Chesapeake Bay with her 8-year-old son, Gideon. They were trying to retrieve a ball. The water was choppy and cold. Neither was wearing a life jacket. Both drowned. Maeve was 40 years old. The Kennedy family has experienced more tragedy in 80 years than most families endure in centuries. Plane crashes, assassinations, skiing accidents, drownings, overdoses, and unexplained health issues have claimed family members across 4 generations. Understanding the pattern. Is there really a curse, or is there another explanation? Some point to the family's size. With so many members across multiple generations, statistically, more tragedies will occur. Others note the Kennedy tendency toward risk-taking. The skiing, the flying, the political careers that made them targets. Author Les Williams argues in his book that there was no supernatural curse, but rather an overpowering patriarch who pushed his children to extremes. Joseph Kennedy Sr. raised his sons and daughters to believe they were better than everyone else, that they had to win at any cost. This relentless ambition influenced their decisions and created enormous pressure. Patrick Kennedy's memoir points to mental health and addiction issues that ran through the family but were kept secret. Rosemary's lobotomy, ordered to hide what was likely mental illness, set a pattern of concealing rather than treating psychological problems. This silence potentially contributed to David Kennedy's death and other tragedies. The wealth and privilege that seemed like advantages also brought pressures. Kennedy children grew up knowing they were expected to achieve greatness, to serve their country, to never show weakness. The constant media attention meant every mistake became public, every tragedy played out for millions to witness. The risk-taking behaviour that characterised many Kennedys, flying small planes, skiing aggressively, taking on powerful enemies, wasn't supernatural. It was a family culture of fearlessness that sometimes crossed into recklessness. John F. Kennedy Jr. flying in poor conditions without his instructor. Michael Kennedy skiing without a helmet. Ted Kennedy driving off a bridge and waiting hours to report it. These weren't acts of fate. They were choices, influenced by a family culture that valued bravery and achievement above caution. The legacy. The Kennedy name still carries weight in American politics and culture. Despite everything, or perhaps because of it, the family remains fascinating. The combination of power, glamour, and tragedy created a narrative that Americans can't look away from. Ted Kennedy, who survived the most tragedies, became one of the most effective senators in American history. He served Massachusetts for 47 years, passing away in 2009 from brain cancer at age 77. He never became president, but his legislative legacy surpassed that of many who did. The family's experiences led to positive changes. Eunice Kennedy Shriver, inspired partly by her sister Rosemary, founded the Special Olympics in 1968. The family's openness about addiction and mental health in recent years has helped reduce stigma around these issues. Robert F. Kennedy's assassination led to changes in how the Secret Service protects presidential candidates. JFK Jr.'s plane crash sparked conversations about pilot training and the dangers of flying without proper certification in poor conditions. But the cost of these lessons was extraordinary. The Kennedy family paid for their place in history with lives cut short, potential unfulfilled, and grief that spanned generations. The story of the Kennedys isn't just about a curse, supernatural or otherwise. It's about how ambition, privilege, trauma, and secrecy can create patterns that persist across generations. It's about how public service and fame exact prices that aren't always visible until it's too late. And it's about how even the most powerful families in America can't escape tragedy, loss, and the consequences of the choices they make. The dynasty that Joseph Kennedy Sr. built achieved remarkable things. His children and grandchildren shaped American politics, culture, and society. But the cost, measured in plane crashes, assassinations, addictions, and early deaths, raises the question of whether any political legacy is worth such profound loss. Today, Kennedy descendants continue to live, work, and in some cases serve in public office. They carry the weight of their family name and all the history that comes with it. The tragedies haven't stopped, but neither has the family. They persist, as they always have, bearing the burden of being America's most famous political dynasty and its most tragic family. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe to our channel so you never miss out on more fascinating stories.